Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. Very fortunate this lovely Monday morning to be sitting down with Sandra Reddish. Sandra is an author and blogger, and as I always do, I'll hand over to Sandra to explain a bit more about why she does what she does. And so good morning, Sandra.
Morning, Lucy, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and to have this opportunity to be involved in your podcast series.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That's amazing. Thank you. Oh, I love it when people actually really want to be here.
I've listened to your other podcasts. They're amazing. They're quite inspiring. So I'm quite honoured.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh, well, we need this on a Monday morning, don't we? Especially after, if anyone watched the football last night in terms of results and feeling a bit down, we need a bit of positivity. So, that's amazing. No, I'm very, very honoured to have you here. So would you explain a bit more about sort of the author side of things for you, the blogger side of things, and why you sort of do what you do?
So I work for quite a small charity called BWP. They're based in Nottinghamshire, and I've worked there since 2018, and I've really got into blogging about domestic abuse, and my blogs got quite successful online, and that really gave me inspiration to blog. And then I wrote, I was running a domestic abuse course, a group course, and I was quite frustrated by how outdated the information was. And so I was determined, with my blogging confidence, I thought, I can do better than this. I can write another course book. I can write another course. And so I did that, and I'll get my book and show you.
I was just going to say,
book number 1 is 1 in 4 Women. And that's the course book for the Survivors programme. And I wrote that programme for our charity, but actually it's starting to get taken on by a few other charities and organisations. So it's a group domestic abuse course, and that's the course book, but it's a standalone book about all manner of domestic abuse as well. Generally angled at when women are still in the relationship. And then spurred on by that, I wrote another book, Beyond the Breakup. You can't see that so clearly. Yeah. So basically, a lot of the women we support are suffering from post-separation domestic abuse. And there's such a presumption that you leave the relationship, it all ends. And not only does it generally not end, in 90% of cases it doesn't end, but it actually intensifies, and the nature of it changes very much. And I was aware that there's not that much information out there about just the post-separation abuse part of domestic abuse, and it's an area that's evolving and changing quite quickly. It was only last year in April 2023 that post-separation coercive control became a thing in its own right, because prior to then there was a requirement to still live with the perpetrator to call it coercive control. So as I say, it's starting to get a bit more recognised as a thing.
Yeah,
and it's evolving, and it's a very different thing to abuse within the relationship. I mean, so many people think, well, how can that happen? How can the abuse carry on? Surely you're safe, surely you're out of the relationship. And all professionals, including, I have to say, myself, have given encouragement to leave. Your problems will end. You need to spare your children from this. You need to leave that relationship. Social care often have that agenda. And then a whole host of different problems materialise. They will do everything expected of him. It's an acquisitive form of abuse, and so she will provide him what he wants, do the housework as he demands, look after the children. She'll provide him sex if he demands it. She supports his needs, and she will placate him and soothe him and try to calm him and do everything that she can to keep him calm. Once she leaves the relationship, she has absolutely no ability to do that anymore, and she's also it causes him to be incensed. She's threatened his feelings of control and his need to control her, and so very often from his point of view, it ups the ante at the same time that she can't do anything to calm and placate him. So it very much, the dynamics change horribly. And 75, it can be very much more dangerous for her as well, because if we look at the figures for domestic homicides, we see that about 75% of those domestic homicides happen post-separation. And so, you know, when there's this big push to, you need to leave the relationship, it's dangerous, you being in that. Well, actually, it's a whole lot more dangerous when women do leave. And I think it's just so important that it's all about choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some occasions it really is better to stay with that man and keep him calm. Thankfully, in a lot of situations, it can be navigated a safe departure from that relationship. But I think what women absolutely need to not be naive to what subsequently happens. And it's a very gendered form of abuse, post-separation abuse. Whereas abuse within the relationship disproportionately affects women, we're seeing that post-separation it even more disproportionately affects women.
And the way you sum it up, it's so true. And what I love about what you talk about, what you say, because obviously, you know, the passion for post-separation abuse is huge, and that's brilliant, because you're right, it doesn't get talked about nearly enough. And I think something that doesn't get talked about either is there are times when people choose to stay. And again, it will be that judgment from society of, well, why would you stay? Well, there's a million reasons why someone may stay. It could be down to financial, it could be down to the children, it could be down to the fact that they care for the perpetrator or the perpetrator cares for them. There's so many reasons why. So, and maybe for some people it is a case of, but I've invested a lot in this marriage, in this relationship, and whatever it is. And you know, it is difficult when somebody says to you, well, I don't want to leave. I just want to know how to keep myself and my children safe in that environment. And I think that's something that's going to be very hard for society to understand as a whole. I think when you've worked in that area, you do understand it a bit better. You still, as a human being, think, I just want to protect that person and I don't want them to be in that situation. But I think as professionals, it's true, isn't it? You know, we also understand that, okay, well, that's your decision. It's your choice. What can we do then to keep you safe? And I do think that's something that's going to take time for people to get their heads around. But you're right, you know, when post-separation abuse is ever even just slightly touched on, it's never really understood just how dangerous a time it is, that escalation of the perpetrator, as you said, losing that power and control. You know, it's you they want to control, it's yourself, you know, and the children, they want to control all of that. And they can't do that if you leave. You know, it's going to make it very difficult. You put in barriers in the way, you put in challenges in their way. So it doesn't mean automatically a perpetrator is going to say, oh, well, I can't carry on controlling that. But that's their need. That's what they have to do. And so they will continue to do it at all costs, whether it's through the family court, whether it's through social services, whether it's through the police, whatever it is. They will do it to keep that control and to try and wear down the victim or survivor. And I think that's another thing that doesn't get discussed, how exhausting post-separation abuse is. It's not something that will take you months, years, we're talking decades sometimes. And again, that doesn't get talked about, does it?
No, and what you say about the kind of losses, the financial losses of leaving the relationship. So there's a myth that, oh, only good things happen when you leave that relationship. But actually, even in an abusive relationship, there is a lot there for women. There's the finances, there's the home, there's the structure of everything that comes with that relationship, even if it's a bad one, and that all gets left behind when the relationship is ended. And the isolation can intensify. And this is a strange one, isn't it? Because, as you say, Lucy, she might still love him, and women do very often still love that perpetrator. And it's sometimes, in the case of trauma bonding, it's not despite his abuse, it's because of his abuse. And very often her life, her social structure has been dismantled by him because she's in that relationship, and she only has him. She has nobody else. She only has him. And if she is brave enough to leave that relationship, people think, oh, she can just get her friends again. Well, no, because he might stand in the way of that.
Exactly.
He might go on this social media campaign of rubbishing her to everybody and purporting to be the victim of her abuse. But not only that, she's lost her self-esteem. She can't just get her friends back again. It's not that simple. And also, so she's isolated. And it's so much worse because she doesn't even have him. And she often has a massive, great, unfillable void where who gave her everything in terms of social contact, he filled that void. Post-separation, she hasn't even got him. And this is what I'm told, women often miss their perpetrator quite badly. And they're not deluded as to his abusiveness, but that missing and that longing for him is still there. And partly because she has nobody else.
Yeah, God, you're touching on things that don't get talked about nearly enough. And I shouldn't say it makes me so happy because it's such a devastating topic, but you're right. Again, women that I've worked with have talked about that almost like the shame that they feel for missing the perpetrator and because it has become, that's your life. Everything you've known is that person. They have made sure that they are at the core of absolutely everything. So when somebody says, I miss them, or I still love them, and again, it happens time and time again. It's not for us as society to say, oh, how ridiculous. They put you through this, they put you through that. And family friends, sadly, sometimes will do that. And especially if you're trying to rebuild bridges with family and friends, because like you say, in terms of isolation, very often you've lost a lot of your family and friends because of the abuse. So when you try to rebuild those bridges, again, very often that you will find family and friends say, oh, you can't possibly still care. They did, and they will badmouth, and obviously because they care about the person, they don't want to see them hurt. But if we stand back from the situation for a minute and think, okay, they were in a long-term relationship with that person, or they were married to that person, or they have children with that person, so that's ties, for life. Then of course, we have to understand that this is something that person has become so reliant on. And from the victim and survivor's perspective, they did genuinely love. Very often victims and survivors are empaths, aren't they? They're very feeling, very loving, very caring. And I think, from their perspective, they did genuinely love that person. It's just it wasn't reciprocated by the perpetrator, because perpetrators don't know how to love. They will, as you say, trauma bond, love bomb. They will do all those things to make sure you stay where you're supposed to stay, and do the whole kind of in terms of trauma bonding. Well, we've had that argument now, or we've had that blazing row, and now what I'm going to do is things will calm down for a while, and then you'll just want it to get back to where we were happy in the beginning. But you were never truly happy, because they were never being their authentic self, the perpetrator. They were maybe they are actually being their authentic self, which is cruel and malicious and manipulative, but you never really get to know a perpetrator, do you? Because they're so cunning, they're so sly.
So true. And during the relationship, the perpetrator controls everything. Post-separation, sometimes women feel a bit directionless in terms of, oh my goodness, like they might have some control back that's possible, but it's like, what do I do with it? What do I do with my spare time? When women have spent so much time referring to him for every decision that they make, even what do they wear in the morning, what clothes do they wear, who they're allowed to see, what they're allowed to do, it can be a massive change. And it's a change that's possible to, make progress on, but initially it can be very, very difficult. And then, the abuse changes in nature, so new abuse becomes available that really wasn't so much available during the relationship. It's when we see the economic abuse being massively stepped up in relation to let's split the household resources and go for a financial separation. You can rarely rely on an abusive man, like hardly ever, to be honest, in financial negotiations. And the law seems ill-equipped to deal with this kind of thing, to protect and support women. He'll fail to financially support his children, destroy and damage the children's things, run run up debts in his former partner's name, refused to cooperate with childcare. So massive amount of economic abuse, and then legal abuse. That's often the first time you start seeing legal abuse is post-separation.
Yeah, 100%. And I did an episode the other day with somebody, and we touched on family court and the legal aspect of things. And what they were saying was, you presume because you tell the truth that you are going to be believed. And that's where, sadly, for so many victims and survivors, that's where they're let down by these systems, because perpetrators will lie. Out and out will lie, like you just said, you know, in terms of the assets or economically not being there and stepping up and saying, okay, so we're both responsible for the children, I will do this. That doesn't happen. Perpetrators will do whatever it takes to make your life as difficult as possible. And, you know, and so when you go to these services, these systems that are supposed to be there to protect people who are experiencing abuse, so often you find that they're told, well, there's not enough evidence, or it's tipped out, or you didn't report it to the police, so it can't possibly have ever happened. What they don't appreciate is very often somebody hasn't reported something because they're scared, they won't be believed, the perpetrator has threatened to kill themselves or the children if you ever do that, or if you ever leave me. And there's so many things that the fear of so many things for a victim and survivor is huge. And then to talk to these systems and to try and explain what you're experiencing, to be told it's just, you know, it's just a I think Richard Port touched on this a while ago. It's just a toxic relationship. It's just tit for tat. No, it's not. This is the first time a victim or survivor has actually maybe had 5 minutes to process what they've been through, and now they're trying to process it on top of dealing with lots of different multi-agencies being involved, and doing it all whilst trying to raise children as well. It's massive.
Totally.
You know,
and it's such a good point, Lucy, that you mentioned that these organisations of the state don't understand very often, so they don't support. Not only that, he very often uses these organisations of the state to persecute her. So malicious reports get made to social care that might be believed, not always, but sometimes they are. Malicious reports to the police. The amount of women I've supported who have been interviewed by the police for trumped up allegations of sometimes domestic abuse, criminal damage, assault, all sorts of things. And so he uses these organisational structures to persecute the family courts are very much used. They're a playground for narcissists who love the attention of an audience. And these organisational structures, they're ill-equipped. They seem to lack training. They seem to not understand this charming man who's concerned about his ex-wife's mental health and her ability to care for the children. Is just the classic domestic abuser. He fits that caricature, but they don't understand. There's a lot of lack of understanding. Yeah, so that intensifies so much post-separation. And sometimes it starts for the first time post-separation. So there are two things. He might have a complete obsession about her, and abusive men often consider that their partner is their property to control, and how dare she leave. And you know, sometimes popular media romanticizes obsessional love, and that doesn't help. That normalizes it. So he might have an obsession about winning her back, but it's often a bit of a creepy obsession. Well, always a bit of a creepy obsession. And he will often flip between nice and nasty, like it'll be red roses one day and then death threats the next. That's often the pattern that I see. They can't be consistently nice. It's always a manipulative nice anyway. And then the other aspect of it is he'll often seek to completely annihilate and wreck her reputation. And he might take to social media to do that, or he might contact her family and friends. And you wouldn't believe how many people are susceptible to being drawn in by him. Yeah, it's often the case that a woman won't disclose her abuse until after she's left, because she might thought, feel shamed about it. She might feel loyalty to him, all sorts of different reasons. And then when she talks about her abuse for the first time, she's often not believed. And like, why didn't you say that before if that's the truth? You know, and hang on a minute, he's saying it was you who had all the affairs. So, you know, and he's saying he's heartbroken and he couldn't have tried harder for you. And there's this thing that happens called toxic triangulation. He'll often, you know, move in on her closest friends, family members, and work them against her. And that can very, very often happen. And she gets isolated further.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you're right, when family and friends are brought into it, and sometimes the family and friends can have been involved, you know, for many, many years. And if he can't or she can't get the response that they want from the victim or survivor, because they're now trying to put those boundaries in place for themselves, you're right, what they're going to do, they're going to go down a different avenue. They will talk to the friends, they will talk to the family, they will, and if they can, you know, this is where again it's really interesting, because if people think, oh, I'd never fall for that, or I would never, you know, I'd see them coming a mile off, well then how come so often family and friends are manipulated by the perpetrator into believing that, you know, well, I was only doing the best, and I have seen cases where the family will then almost encourage the victim or survivor to return to the perpetrator.
Very often.
You know,
Oh,
and
he
that's,
really loves you. He's really
yeah,
missing you. He's,
yeah.
you know,
He's
because
ringing me day and night to tell me
yeah,
how much yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And
So
that's scary.
horrible dynamics happen, and very often she has a total annihilation of her reputation. It's when revenge porn happens as well.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
so much of the time, the revenge porn might not be carried out, but if she knows that if she doesn't return to that relationship, then he's threatening, he's holding that
exposed.
over her.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say, oh, well, let him do his worst. I'll suffer. Some women just can't.
No.
You know, when the threats are to send whatever to their family, friends, boss at work, it's too shameful and humiliating, and so they're weaponized in that way as well.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. And that's the awful thing, isn't it? Because with perpetrators, there is no, this is my personal belief, and from what I've seen over the years, is a perpetrator there's no lengths that they won't go to. You know, a victim or survivor can be very, very shocked at the way a perpetrator, the depths that they'll sink to. I know I was talking to somebody recently, and again, it's a pattern that keeps emerging, is very often when the perpetrator realizes that the victim or survivor is starting to move forward with their life and they're putting those boundaries in place, and maybe if they're going through various systems, the perpetrator will say, they're crazy, they need sectioning, they're crazy, they need an assessment. You know, you see that come up time and time again, because finally the victim or survivor is saying, listen, I've experienced this and I'm now telling the truth. But that frightens the perpetrator. So what they have to do is try and desperately remove the victim or survivor from the speaking out about what they know to be true, and saying, no, they're absolutely crazy. There's so many times I've heard that they're crazy. They're just, you know, that's the answer to it. It's a blueprint. There's so much
so
about
often.
domestic abuse that there's a blueprint, isn't there? And if you had everybody who'd experienced it, each person would have their own unique situation, because everybody reacts to things differently. We're all unique human beings, but there always is a thread, isn't there? There's always, and with post-separation abuse, there's very, very similar threads of how a perpetrator will up the ante when the victim or survivor, if they're fortunate enough to leave.
Totally. And that relentlessness you talk about, Lucy, I kind of visualize them as like automatums, like they are on a program, they are going for her, and nothing is going to stand in their way, nothing is going to stop them. They're just going for it. And you see, as you say, the depths to which they go, horrendous, and those depths go very, very low when children are involved.
Yeah.
Because so often women say to me, oh, he's a really good dad, you know, despite his abuse of me, he's a really good dad. No, and then I never come across a good dad who perpetrates this kind of abuse towards the child's mother. but very often they will actively weaponize the children against her and use them in every way they can to get at her. And very often they don't care about the damage they cause to their own children.
No.
As long as they cause her harm, they'll do it.
Yeah.
And some terrible ways that children get abused and manipulated and caught up in all of this happen.
Heartbreaking. And you know, God, we're touching on so many things here. Two things that crossed my mind then when you were talking, it's because it all ties in, is when we think of mental health and domestic abuse, because again, you know, somebody had said to me recently, oh, I never kind of linked the two. And I was saying, but if you've been psychologically abused for many, many years and emotionally abused for many years, of course that will have an impact on your mental health. And then to top it all off, if you are then experiencing post-separation abuse for many, 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 many years, people will become suicidal. They will feel like there is no other way out, you know, and there are plenty of cases that we know of where that has happened, where, you know, in instances where it's the mother, then she said, I can't, I don't know how, you know, to be in that situation where there's nowhere else to turn, that you are that afraid, you are that scared that you don't feel that there's anywhere else to turn. And as you say, with children, when they're weaponized, when they're used as pawns in the perpetrator's game, you know, where's the support for them? And that's why I think that's something that really needs to be talked about more, is that there is support. There are children and young people, workers working within domestic abuse charities. They are there to support. And if children get that support early enough, then they do have a chance at maybe hopefully moving forward and seeing that, you know, when they talk about, when I worked at my local domestic abuse charity, one of the things is the circle of control, you know, so with children and talking about what's within their control, what isn't, and what, you know, and it's just really important, isn't it, for them to understand that how somebody else treats them isn't their problem, i.e. it's not down to them how somebody else behaves. What they can do though is say, that's not acceptable to me. And that's when children can start to put those boundaries. But if they don't know that and they aren't supported in that way, that's where I think it's so important that people do know that there is support out there for their children. Because if you're trying to balance it all by yourself and be your child's counsellor, carer, mother, you know, everything, friend, a lot, when you're trying to do it all, it's exhausting. And sometimes you're too close to the situation, and maybe the child does need somebody to speak to that they think, okay, well, I don't want to upset mom because mom's got enough on her plate, you know. So having somebody that they can talk to where they know that they feel safe and trusted, to me is so important.
And that's interesting that you talk about the circle of control in relation to children, because I talk about control in my post-separation abuse book, because so often when women are out of that relationship, there might be areas of control that they can get back, but the concepts of control in their mind can become confused, because they will very often think that they have responsibility for their perpetrator because they've been told that, like, he'll drop something, he'll make a mistake, he'll get angry, he'll shout at them, and he'll blame it all on them.
Yeah.
And I think when that's gone on for years, they will truly believe that they are responsible for his actions. And then they don't have any responsibility in their own life. They don't have any control in their own life. And so when they leave the relationship, they'll often think that they're still in control of him, and which is unbounded behaviour, really, stepping into somebody else's circle of control. But then they won't acknowledge the control that they could take back. And there will be post-separation, it's not all bad at all. There will be areas of control that they could get back themselves, and it's just identifying that and breaking it down.
Definitely. It can be things, you know, we were talking before about with the isolation and family and friends and trying to rebuild those relationships. The things that you can do is, for a lot of people as well, is they may not have worked for many years. So finding something that you're passionate about, finding something, and it doesn't matter what it is. It might be volunteering somewhere. It might be volunteering at your local charity, whatever it is. It might be a new career path or a degree or going to college, whatever. You know, it's an exhausting and very, very scary time, but it's also can be a very exciting time, because this is the next chapter.
Totally. The main thrust in my book is describing these forms of abuse, because they can really validate women, because so often women think, oh, it's just me, it's something about me, that the reason I'm being abused like this. Everybody else leads a bad relationship and they're fine, so it's just me. And so it's just validating women and telling them you're not alone, these are common patterns of behaviour. And that's really important. The other thing is, there are sometimes things that we can do to help our situation. You know, it might be, on a rare occasion, a child arrangement order is helpful, a report to the police can be helpful, a report to social care might be helpful. So there might be practical steps you can take. But then beyond that, when everything else is done practically that can be, and when you've been validated, and when you know you're not alone with your abuse, then is the time that it's important to have a look at how can I manage myself and my situation going forward, so I'm less traumatized by this, so I can recover some of my life despite this ongoing abuse. And that might sound tragic, that you talk about carrying on despite the abuse, but there are quite a few techniques and tools and different ways of thinking, different ways of operating that can really help women carry on and go forward and manage each day better than they were. And so I talk about quite a few of those things in my book.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'll put the links as well. When I put this on YouTube and Spotify and things, we'll make sure that we get links on there to the books for people to be able to go and have a look at. And, you know, you're right. It's so important to explain that it is difficult. And obviously in terms of that moving forward day by day and going forward, but it is part of who you are forevermore. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you've learned so much. You've learned what you won't put up with anymore. You know, you've made your mind up what is and what isn't going to be in your life. And I think for so many people, they accept that there will be days where you feel on top of the world, and there will be days where you feel like you're back to square one. But each day, as long as you're trying to put one foot in front of the other, and you take that time, and it's so much about it is about time, isn't it? And, you know, we can all say time's a great healer, time this, give it time. But it's true, time is the one thing that will give you perspective when you look back and see how far you've come.
Totally. I also think hard work is important. I see recovery is an active process, and it's about getting direction as to what actually can you do, and you can become better than you were. You can become more mindful, more aware, and because a lot of us kind of bumble through life without too much consideration. And I think when life is good, you can do that, and that works kind of okay. But this process, being abused post-separation, really can tear you apart. And then comes a more mindful rebuilding. Otherwise, it won't happen on its own, but it can happen, and it can happen better, and you can become a better version of you.
And that's
I'm
why
not saying that's always possible, but it certainly is possible. Like people often say after a major terrible diagnosis, that they realise there's you know, that they could die, and they are more mindful about every day. That can come out of this type of abuse as well. So recovery should be an active process to make you a better version of you.
Absolutely. And there's so much, you know, that you've proven to yourself how. I find one of the words I always found really difficult is when somebody will say about victim or survivor, oh, they're really resilient. To me, it isn't just about resilience. It's about so much more. It's courage. It's facing fear of change. So many people would never want to change their life. They're happy with the way things are, the status quo, all of that. Add into the fact that you've experienced abuse and you have made this massive decision to leave the situation, to start a new life, potentially with very young children, knowing it's going to be a very long road. You know, the courage that it takes to reach out and talk to support services. Again, I don't think that is very often explained. And I think services need to be better equipped at identifying who needs the support, you know, because many times social services will be involved and the abuse hasn't necessarily been mentioned because, like you said, many people don't realise it till once they've left. Perpetrator could be using social services as a weapon and saying, oh, this, that, and the other about mom X, Y, and Z. So, the services need to be more aware of how they can support and say, look, okay, I think that this is what you're experiencing. And you know what? In your local area, there is this charity, there's this organisation, and we're not saying you have to ring now, we're not saying you have to email now, but, in your own time, because again, back to time is everything, and timing has to be right for that person. They may not be ready the minute they walk out the door. It might be a year down the line that they think, okay, now I need help. Now I need to talk to somebody who is going to get this and understand it, because my family and friends don't. And I think, having all these support services, what you're doing, not only working within support services, but also the books that you're writing, the blogs that you're writing, it's giving people so many options of where to find support. And that to me is key, because it can't all just be through one channel. We have to give people options, because the one thing that they have not had for many years is control over their own life. But doing what you're doing is giving back that control and saying, actually, you can read a blog if you prefer, or you could read the book, or you could contact a service and get support. That to me is where things will change, when people realize there's lots and lots of different ways you can be supported. Yeah.
And I'm hoping to, I run a post-separation abuse course through our charity, but I'm hoping to kind of write that up as a course and spread that a bit further afield.
That would be amazing.
Sounds really, really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And it is. And it'd be interesting in a few years' time, looking back on this episode, just how far we've come in terms of talking about post-separation abuse, because I know you and I are 100% on the same page on this one, and we need more people talking about it. We need more people understanding that abuse doesn't stop the day you walk out, and it will have an impact that lasts the rest of your life, but it doesn't mean it has to ruin the rest of your life. You can, I've said to so many people, you can be happy. You genuinely can be happy. You just have to find the tools. You have to find what's right for you, what's the right support for you, because everybody's different. What works for one person, some people might find group facilitation really helpful. Some people might prefer one-to-one counselling. Some people might prefer to listen to a podcast. You never know. There's lots and lots of different ways of accessing that support, and I think that's what is so important, that what you're doing is getting that out there and making it clear that post-separation abuse isn't ignored, and it is recognized as something that is huge. Really, there's no other way to describe it.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's massive. But honestly, I would you, I don't often do this, but sometimes, especially if I have thoroughly enjoyed this episode, is there anything you would want to sum up at the end? Because obviously it's something we're both so passionate about, post-separation abuse. Is there any sort of pearl of wisdom you would like to dispense so that people could take it away after this episode? I don't want to put you on the spot.
You have put me on the spot, but I've got a few things. It's fine. Don't suffer alone. There is, as you said, Lucy, a lot of support there. I find the most important thing for the women I support is that they're validated in their that somebody understands that they're not alone, and you can only understand those things if you seek support in one way, shape or form. Others share our experience of this, and that's quite important, even if nothing beyond that positive comes, but just knowing that you're not imagining this, it's a thing, and these are common patterns of behaviour. So seek support to understand that.
You couldn't have summed it up better, I don't think. That's exactly it. It is, you're not imagining it, it's not in your head, you're not going mad. That's one of the most important things I think anybody needs to take away, is if you do feel like, you're going mad, or it's all down to you, it's not, and maybe stop for a minute, speak to somebody, and you may find that actually what you're experiencing is abuse, because many, many people don't even realise they are experiencing it. And maybe sometimes the family and friends that are involved with the victim and survivor could be experiencing it themselves and don't recognise it. So that's why they can't help and support, because they don't see it themselves. Oh, Sandra, I think we could do a few episodes.
We could.
We need to do a series on post-separation abuse with Sandra and Lucy.
For it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Honestly, this has been amazing, and it will help so many people. So thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Where